Okay, well, it's noon, everybody. So we'll go ahead and welcome everyone to our first annual Indigenous LGBTQIA and Two-Spirit panel. My name is Christina Groves, and I am the Behavioral Health Program Director here at the Urban Indian Center of Salt Lake. We're located kind of central Salt Lake City in Utah. I know we have some people who registered that are out of state. And we're very excited to have a very interesting and kind of wide-ranging group of Indigenous LGBTQ and Two-Spirit panel participants. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our participants, kind of starting in the as I see them on my screen, and then we'll go ahead and jump into the first question. And so I'm gonna introduce the participants, but I'm also going to ask them to, after I call them by name, to introduce themselves to our listeners. So first of all, we have Antonieta Yazzie. So I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Okay. So my name is Antonieta Yazzie. I am Navajo and Mexican, hence the name. Let's see, what else did you want to introduce? This is the first question right here. Yeah, no, I'm April Yazzie is my sister. I'm just really happy to be here. And thanks for letting me participate.
Great, thank you so much. Our next panel participant is Kylie Reese.
Hi, okay. My name is Kylie. My name is Kylie Reese. I'm from Monument Valley, Utah, on the Navajo Reservation. I was born and raised there. My clans are Turijini Neshli, Nakai Bashichin, Izatlana Dashichedo, Nakai Dashinal. In English way, it's Bitterwater Clan and Mexican, and Many Goats Clan and Mexican. I identify as two-spirited, and I don't know what else to say.
Thank you, Kylie. Our next panelist is Lenny Hayes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tuktawanaki Luta, Redstone Coast. My English name is Lenny Hayes, and I am from the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate of the northeast corner of South Dakota, and I currently reside right now in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Thanks, Lenny. Our next panelist is Rose Quintana.
Hi, I'm Rose Quintana. I'm an MA here at the medical clinic at the Urban Indian Center of Salt Lake. And I just wanted to introduce myself in Navajo because that's my language. So, She'eya Rose Quintana Yanushke, Tohana Nishle, Loda'a Bashichin, Tobaha Dashuche, Nakai Dashanella, Diata Adzan Nishle. So, I'm from the Nearwater clan, born for the Utes. I live in Spanish Fork, Utah, and my grandmother used to live in Denahoots, Arizona. And I identify as two-spirited as well.
Thanks, Rose. Our next panelist is Marianna Ramiro-Gomez.
Yeah, Marianna Ramiro-Gomez. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I was born in Mexico, raised in Utah, and live in Salt Lake City.
Thank you. And then our final panelist is Cody McCook-AhTave.
Mike, my name is Cody McCook-AhTave. I am originally from Fort Duchesne, Roosevelt area on the Uinta and Ouray Reservation. I currently live in Salt Lake City, Utah with my husband, Turner Free-AhTave. I identify as two-spirit, man first, gay male second, and my pronouns are he, him, and they, them.
All right, well, welcome and thank you all again for, agreeing to participate in this. I think we were really excited here. Just a little bit about our agency, if you don't know about the Urban Indian Center. The Urban Indian Center has been here since about 1974 in Salt Lake City. And it's had a lot of evolution to get to where we are today. But primarily, the center has always been kind of a community center, a gathering place here in the city, especially for Native Americans who are, leaving the reservation or leaving their homelands. The agency has always provided services to our indigenous relatives during the time that we've been open. And currently, we provide medical services, we provide behavioral health services, we provide youth and family services. And now that we're coming out of COVID, we're also starting to offer more in-person services, which is kind of exciting for us. And then we are also taking a look at, how do we be open and welcoming and be a community center for all of our community members and not just part of our community members. And so that is a big reason why we wanted to present this panel today, to be able to have some conversation, to be able to make connections, and to be able to figure out how do we continue this conversation and expand our services moving forward. So we'll go ahead and get into the first question. And so the first question is, please talk a little bit more about how you identify, whether that includes your gender identity, your sexual identity, a racial or ethnic identity, some of that, none of that, or all of the above. It's a big question, I know. So we'll just start right off the bat and see who wants to, open up the door.
Well, I can go first since I didn't say how I identify. So one of the things that I always say when I identify myself and sort of decolonizing my way of thinking, one of the things that I will say is that I identify as a Winkta first, because that was the word that was given to me by my people. Second, I will identify as a Two-Spirit male, knowing that that term didn't come about until 1990, so it's a fairly new word. And then lastly, I will identify as a gay male. So that is my sense of how I identify. One of the things I also talk about too is that for me, I don't use pronouns. And one of the reasons why I don't use pronouns is because I believe it's a form of colonization. And when I say that, I also mean that in the respect for other people who want to use pronouns, which is fine, which is good. I'm not saying that pronouns are a bad thing, but through my work throughout, around Indian country, and having conversations with elders within my own community through the Ojibwe and Lakota, Dakota elders within my community, one of the things that they've talked about is being really confused when people say, which pronouns do you use? And in the conversation with the elders, what they talk about is, before colonization, that gender identity wasn't a huge importance in our communities because we respected everyone, right? We never asked anybody, how do you identify? Or which pronouns do you use? Because I don't use pronouns, I normally will tell people, call me Lenny, call me human being. If you want to talk about me in a sentence, call me he, him, and his. But one of the things that I always talk about too is that when we talk about pronouns, I honestly believe that there was no Native person or indigenous person that was invited to the table to have the conversation about pronouns, because if we were invited to the table, then they would have a deep understanding of like our cultural and spiritual aspects and how we talk about gender. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
I can go ahead and go next. So I do identify as a two-spirited man first, and that's usually when it comes to speaking with other community members within the Native community. The reason I do mention gay male second is just because I feel that it's sometimes easier to navigate conversations with the non-Native community when it comes to personal identity. And I do also identify as multicultural. I am a biracial person. My mother's side is Caucasian and my father's side is Native and Mexican. So I am multicultural. My sexual identity, I identify as a gay man. And I think it's important to kind of separate those two different things as far as gay man and Two-Spirit, especially because, you know, Two-Spirit is more of a gender identity or a multi-gender identity and not necessarily a sexual orientation. So I think it's important that we kind of try to clarify those two different stances as well. Yeah, and that's how I identify.
All right, I can follow up on that. So like I said, I'm biracial, Mexican and Navajo, and I think those are both really big parts of my identity. So I always make sure that everybody knows it. As far as like sexual orientation, I feel like I'm like still fairly new. So I think the term like queer kind of covers a majority of like, you know, I don't feel like I feel confident enough to be like, this is it. So yeah, I would say those are like my main identities, I would say. I'm also from Utah, and I think that plays in a big part of like who I am and like how I perform all these identities, I guess. So I think I'll throw that in there as well.
I can go next. So I'm Rose. I'm also have multiple cultures. You know, I'm Navajo, Ute, and Hispanic. So I kind of got a little bit of everything. But I identify as two-spirited more than saying I'm a lesbian, which I would think in the modern day society, I'd probably use that word just so they understand a little bit more. But two-spirited, I really recommend using that word just because I am very traditional. My family comes from the reservation. So, you know, that's how I was born and raised. If I were to use pronouns, it's she and her, but I don't really use pronouns. You know, I don't identify myself with anything. I'm just more, I'm Rose, you know, I'm two-spirited. I'm who I am. And you can call me what you like as long as you know that I'm going to be me and you have to be respectful and okay with it. But yeah, I'm two-spirited. And also my partner is actually next to me, just so you guys know. So if we're laughing and smiling, it's because we're in the same room.
I'm
So
the other person. Sorry. I'm Rose's girlfriend. I don't know if you guys know, but I identify as two-spirited. Just as Rose said, that I'm also traditional, and I think that's the most appropriate way to say it down on the reservation. I don't really use pronouns as well. It's just who I am. I'm Kylie. I'm who I don't know. I don't use pronouns, and I'm mainly Navajo, so I don't know my Mexican side. I'm very traditional in what I do, and yeah, I don't use pronouns, but I'm two-spirited. Yeah.
So identify as queer and Chicana as well because of how I was raised. I was also undocumented, so that also plays into a lot of my lived experiences. My family is also very, was raised in the LDS church. So that's also a big part of my identity and how I navigate the world.
Thank you all. I love these answers, and I'm really glad that, you know, that everybody is willing to kind of talk about, you know, how they want to be perceived in the world. I think, you know, that going back to Lenny's point about, you know, did people ask us, you know, how about these categories, how we want to be identified? I think all of your answers really show that we want to be, everybody wants to be seen as who they really are and to be respected and you know, treated as part of the community. So our next question is, and I think we maybe kind of some of you kind of talked a little bit about it. So if you want to answer a little bit more, we may not spend a lot of time on this, but we're wondering a little bit about how you came to identify the way that you did, and maybe a little bit more about what that journey has kind of looked like. We're definitely humans and on this path of knowledge and growing. So our journeys are not complete by any means. But how did you get to this place where you are right now?
I can jump in. I think for me, like all the identities I mentioned, like, being biracial, Mexican, Navajo, growing up in Utah, on the queer spectrum, all of this has been like a really, really, really long journey for me, like ever since I was young. I felt like I was raised in a mostly Native community. And so like having my mom straight from Mexico, she was trying to instill Mexicanness in us. It was always like a weird battle, right? Like, I'm not enough of this, I'm not enough of that. And it took me a really long time to come to terms with like, okay, I'm enough of who I am as is. And the queer identity, I feel like, has taken an even longer time. I guess another identity you could throw out there for me would be like a baby gay, because I'm like, I feel like I barely came out, right? And it was really hard because I grew up in a very religious family, Mormon family, and I was terrified for the longest time, right? Like I was already the black sheep of the family without that identity out there. And so bringing that out there just felt like a confirmation of like all the terrible things they thought about me. And so, I mean, I guess just from that statement alone, you can see that there was a lot of like, what do you call it? Self-hatred or whatever, I was ashamed. But luckily for me, like, I think I spent a long time trying to make up for it in different ways, right? Like, I need to be successful in my work. I need to be successful at school, be a good person in every other way, right? But I think luckily, like when I was like, okay, I am who I am and I know it now. I could start telling everybody. Coming out to my family was the hardest thing, but it was also the easiest thing, right? It went so much better than I could have expected. I think we're still navigating it for sure, you know what I mean? My parents are definitely, Mariana is actually my partner, but to the parents still, she's my friend. But we're working on it, right? They've gotten to know her and everything, and it's kind of been really awesome. So I think I'm starting on that part, just trying to be true to myself in all spaces is kind of hard because I spent so many years like hiding it, right? So like even when I go to work, when I meet new people, it's not something that I need to say, but sometimes I feel like I want to say it just because I just want to put it out there because I'm so used to just naturally not disclosing it. But yeah, that's a little bit of my journey.
Well, I have so much to say, so I'm going to try to keep it as short as I possibly can. So I grew up on a reservation, and when I lived on a reservation, I identified as a gay male or a gay boy. And when I moved to Minneapolis 26 years ago, with a lot of issues, a lot of trying to work through my own trauma that I experienced living on a reservation. So when I grew up on a reservation too, the word winkta was a derogatory term that was used against me. So because of that, I had my own internalized homophobia and really hated who I was. So when I moved to the city and then started my healing journey, I came across community of individuals who identified as Two-Spirit. And so in talking with them, that's where I learned to embrace the term Two-Spirit. I did my own research, talked with people about, well, what does it mean to be Two-Spirit? So today when I think about the Two-Spirit identity, for me, it's that connection to culture and spirituality, which defines who I am as a Two-Spirit person. So I really embrace both having a male and female spirit, even though like in my culture, the Dakota culture, the term Two-Spirit means something different rather than how we would view it in our community, right? So like a medicine person said to me, he said, "You're not Two-Spirit." He said, "A Two-Spirit in our culture is a woman who carries a baby." He said, "You're a Winkta." That's the word that was given to you. So through my own healing journey, I've learned to really embrace and reclaim that word Winkta, even though it was a derogatory term. So for me, just calling myself a Winkta, it's a lot of honor, because even within my own culture, my Dakota culture, and we talk about in community, we know that people who identified as Winkta were considered, you know, sacred. They were holy. They were honored before colonization. So I really reclaimed that word. The Two-Spirit identity is something that has helped me in my journey of healing. So again, like Cody, sometimes I will call myself a gay male in different communities, especially non-Native communities, because I don't want to have that conversation with them, because often, and this is my own personal and professional opinion, and I mean this in a good way, but also in a way that really I want people to think about, you know, the LGBTQ community can often be an oppressed community, but they also have become the oppressors, in the fact that why have we not been a part of that national language of LGBTQ? When we have all these other acronyms that have been added to it, but you don't see Two-Spirit. And one of the things that I really advocate about is just that understanding that we're First Nations people, and why are we not a part of that language? So it's like we're having to choose what we feel comfortable with, but also keeping that cultural and that spiritual aspect as part of who we are individually. So I'm not saying that everybody thinks in that way, but that's sort of how I think, which helps me to really advocate strongly for our community, to get our community recognized by the mainstream LGBTQ community. But I do respect and honor people in how they identify. And I always remind people, you know, we just need to ask people how they identify and respect that, even though we may not agree with it, or we may have our own personal opinions. But just, you know, and I guess I really, as I was saying before, I really just take claim in that word Winkta. For me, that's a very powerful word, because that word's been around for thousands of years. It's not something that's just been recently created. But again, you know, just that understanding how colonization has impacted us in many, many ways. You know, our identity as Two-Spirit people, or even as a Winkta, how it's even really impacted our language, our values. So anyway, that's my thoughts. Thank you.
I'll jump in. I think it's really interesting what you were just saying, Lenny, as far as like reclaiming that word and your process on how you came to reclaim that. I was just having a conversation with Christina the other day, because we both are Northern Ute, and we were talking about these different terms that, you know, could possibly be used to describe someone like me, but they've always been kind of more of a derogatory term. And so, you know, that journey that you've been on to reclaim that, I just find that so inspiring. So thank you for sharing that and being so honest about what that process is like for you. Because it's pretty similar for me. I remember, you know, growing up, I only lived on the reservation until I was about 13 years old. And I felt really protected there. I had, you know, wonderful grandparents who raised me that really did protect me. And family was just always around. So I didn't ever hear too many derogatory terms while I was there, besides being called like a tom girl here and there. But for me, I never took that as a negative thing. But as soon as I left the reservation and moved out to Salt Lake City, that's when it really started to hit me with different derogatory terms. It was the first time I heard the word faggot. You know, I was called gay, but it came off in a very like harsh way. So through that, I kind of found my own footing as far as like, okay, like I'm not a traditional like sandy Utah looking person. You know, I am definitely, my skin is darker. My parents are not LDS. I'm not at church on Sundays. So it was really hard for me to find a community in my teenage years. So I found myself having to have this conversation constantly with just trying to create space for myself. And that's why I'm really focused to this day on creating that space for youth and making sure the youth feel safe and giving them a voice, because if it weren't for those times that I was able to find that voice, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. And I did leave. I left Utah really young. I left when I was about 18 years old, and I went straight to Los Angeles. And that's where I really started to develop community and started to see other people that looked like me. And that just doesn't mean like dark skin, you know, that means people that had pink hair, or, you know, people that were a little bit wilder. And so I really found that connection there. And as you, like Lenny, what you were talking about, I really started to do my own research and trying to find different things that connected to me as far as culture went, because I was disencultured growing up. So I really had to struggle to find that connection again. And that's when I found, you know, the term Two-Spirit, and I started to really connect to that and really started to understand the duality between both spirits that are inside of my body. And up until that point, I just, you know, identified as a gay man. But now that I found this, you know, I think that it's something that I try to celebrate all of the time. Kind of, you know, what Antonieta was saying, you know, there was so long that we've been silenced and we haven't been able to hold that space, that every opportunity I get, like I want to talk about it, because I think it's so important for us to continue to hold space and to continue to move forward for everyone in our community. So I appreciate all of your words. Thank you.
Okay, we don't have anybody else that wants to follow up on that answer. We'll kind of move into the next questions, which kind of tease out a little bit more about culture and spirituality. So the first question is that for people on the panel who identify as multicultural or have multiple identities that are important to them, how do you balance walking in different and sometimes conflicting worlds? Sometimes our different cultures have values and beliefs that are conflicting, or that can be perceived as conflicting. So I want to know a little bit more about, you know, how do you navigate those different worlds?
I can answer that. Just to answer, you know, get a little background from the first question. I didn't really come out until I was about 17, you know, older in the teenage years. So I really kept it hidden. However, I do know that everyone already knew, because I was a tomboy. I love sports. I wore shorts. I was such a boy for a young age. And I was always tougher than all the girls. But I already knew that I was two-spirited since like 10 years old. That's how early on it was. But it was really difficult to, you know, tell the family, tell the community, the person that you are, because you don't want anything to change. You don't want to be looked at differently or treated any different than how you were previously. So I also came from two worlds of just traditional and modern day. I was very born into the traditional way with my family, but I was also raised in the city. So all my family members came from the reservation. They were taught the ceremonies, the songs, the singing, dances, all of that. So of course, you know, I caught on to everything, but I also needed to know all of the things that were happening in the modern day world, like who's the latest celebs, who's on TV, you know, or who's the most popular thing to do in fashion. And it was a bit of a struggle, only because just knowing that I needed to be two different kinds of Rose to really, you know, be appropriate for whoever I'm with, whatever community I'm surrounding myself with. With the traditional side, it was a little difficult because I was such a tomboy, and you know, they tell you to wear dresses, the fleece shirts, the jewelry, and all that. But really, I wanted to be in shorts and dress like the guys. But you know, I have long hair, I have to do it this way. But over time, you know, I kind of got the gist of, you know, it's about empowerment more than wearing the female or male clothing. And then just with the modern day world, I'm not LDS, I don't go to church. I'm a brown Hispanic American Indian woman of the LGBTQIA plus community. So I'm like a minority in itself. So I've always been a part of this community where they want to belittle you. So once I finally came out, I didn't want to be little anymore. I didn't want to be the most minority. So I really just hit it out to everyone when I was 16, made my list on who I was going to tell first. And I think the most difficult was just because my parents come from a different generation. They're a little older and they had me at an older age. So of course, in their decade, being from this LGBTQIA community, they kind of kept it hidden, or else you would get murdered, bullied, you know, all these sorts of things would happen to them. So they kind of saw it as there was no, you know, LGBTQIA community. So that was the most difficult because I didn't know how they were going to take it. Surprisingly, they took it really well. I mean, it's just in your head, really. But yeah, it is a little bit of a challenge because my family is in the Title VI Indian Education Program. So we're definitely involved with all the Native community. And I was always worried of what people are going to think of me because my mother has a high name. A lot of people know her. So it took me a lot of years to really just come into myself and just let everyone know I want to be myself. And so I show with pride, you know, who I'm with and show them updates on what we're doing. So yeah, hopefully that answered the two questions together.
The second question kind of looks a little bit more into kind of spirituality as well. And I think whether that's traditional spirituality or mainstream religion, sometimes our identities definitely are in conflict with those things. And I think here in Utah, for people that are outside of Utah, Utah has a very strong religious majority. And so there's a lot of values that kind of influence you both directly and indirectly. So I'm wondering if anybody wants to comment a little bit more about maybe the culture or the spiritual or religious influences.
Well, I definitely have something to say about that, just because I grew up in a, you know, I was in a Catholic boarding school and I was forced to conform to that religion, right? But as of today, what I say personally and for myself, I say religion is man-made. Spirituality is my connection to the Creator. And so that's what I carry with me, even though sometimes religion can be really hard on someone like me, right? And so, I mean, because I even struggle with some of my own family members. They're very strongly connected to the church. And I've had many conversations with them, which became heated conversations also, where I finally had to just say to them, you know what, I'll respect the way you believe, but I need you to respect how I believe, which was my connection to the Sweat Lodge, my connection to, you know, that spiritual aspect of how I want to live. So, you know, that, and after saying that has really like calmed down a lot of the conversation about religion. But again, like, you know, I say these things as being respectful to people, but this is how I carry myself. And I guess my expectation of others is just to respect how I feel. You know, because, you know, if we think about it, I mean, if we really, really think about it and really talk about it, the missionaries and Europeans came in and were murdering our Two-Spirit people. Our people loved us. I mean, they didn't judge us for who we were. We lived in harmony with community. You hear stories of, you know, often sometimes the Two-Spirit camps were outside of the larger Native camp, but that wasn't a bad thing because the community came and sat with Two-Spirit people. So one of the things that I really embrace as a Two-Spirit male, and even as a Wink does, I think about like, what would be my role as a community member? So it would probably be what I do today. I'm a mental and chemical health provider. So I sit with people and I listen to them and I counsel them. So then I would often say, well, then my role would probably be a medicine person, or, you know, that would be my role. So I really embrace that role as a Two-Spirit person. The other thing that I often say too, when I talk about my identity, is that I do honor both my male and female spirit. And I often will say, you know, my female spirit is much more domineering than my male spirit because of my mannerisms, right? And I really embrace that, I honor it. But I also say that I could be butch too and carry wood if I have to, you know, right? So, and I say that in a good way and in a funny way, because that's who I am. And what I also say too is I don't have a coming out story because I believe I came out in a rainbow dress. Because I can remember as far back as a very young child that I was different. But the sad part about it was that the adults that were around me, who were supposed to help me learn about my identity, they were the ones who punished me, right? And then I grew up in a school that wasn't accepting of who I was or who I am. So nobody taught me. I didn't learn about my identity until I was in my adulthood. And that's why I'm very strong in the fact that people ridiculed me, ostracized, bullied me to the point that I hated myself. And so through my own healing journey, that's where I've taken back who I am, and I accept that. And I love who I am. And that's probably one of the reasons why I became a mental health provider, because I know that our community is a community that is not well served. We're often a forgotten population. And I've worked with many individuals who identify as either Two-Spirit or Native LGBTQ and know of their struggles and challenges and the trauma that they've experienced. So again, that's the reason why I do my work, because I know what it feels like to go through that, right? So I want to help other community members. So again, sorry, I went on a tangent here.
Was a good tangent. Also, I no, it was. I think I grew up in the LDS religion for sure, and in my family, it's a big deal for both my parents because I don't know if everyone knows how the LDS religion works, but they were converts from missionaries that came. My dad was on the placement program, which was the Mormon program where they took the kids off the reservation, right, to come live in LDS homes in Utah. And that's how we ended up in Utah. But I think for me, it was really a hard part of my identity to reconcile with like who I am and growing up in that religion. And like how Rose said, like her mom is a very big person in the Native community. I mean, I know her. We all do. My parents were also big in our religious community. So like I grew up in a ward that was specifically for Native Americans. And that's where a lot of my like growing up in a Native community, growing up with those Mormon natives, you know, my parents were big, they still are, you know, and so I think it made it really difficult to be myself, right? I think it was easier for me to stop going to church than to come out to everybody. And in Utah, my job, I work as a school counselor, and a lot of these communities I've worked in. So I recently worked at Springville Junior High School, which is in a very conservative community in Utah. I call it the Utah County of Utah County. it's, you know, like I said before, I don't offer up my identity often, like my views, you know, everything we say, because I'm in a very white conservative space. And at times it's a little bit scary, right? To be yourself. It's very intimidating. Are they going to respect you? They like you in a certain box and how you present yourself. So I feel like I do a lot of like undercover work, right? I get them to like me first and then slowly reveal parts about myself. Be like, oh, psych, you didn't know that you actually are friends with this, you know, person that's on the outside. But I think it's really hard to, sometimes, you know, I go home or sometimes I overhear things and I just let it pass. You know, I don't step in, I don't defend myself because it can be exhausting at times to do that. And I don't want to ostracize people in my work or in the community. But I go home and I kick myself all the time, right? I'm like, I can't believe I didn't say anything. I'm disappointed in me. And I think it's a really difficult thing. I think one of the biggest things I just had to come to terms with in myself is, you know, especially because my family is still very religious. And in order for us to have like a healthy relationship, a lot of times we don't go there, or a lot of times I'll just let them win the arguments, you know what I mean? We don't bring it up. But I think like giving them that level of respect helps them give me that level of respect too, right? Like, I'm not going to fight you on everything. And we know that it's love underneath, right? We all know it's love underneath. I think that's just what I have to remember, you know, every time that my mom comes at me with another scripture or like, oh, Mija, you should just go to church, you know, I just got to remember that she's trying to give me her best tools and I need to respect that. And she's my mom, she loves me, and that's how she's showing her love. And in return, she listens to my conversations. You know, she's asking me like, hey, give me some material to read. Show me what your point of view is. And I think because I'll give her the time and space, you know, listen to what she has to say. She does the same for me. And I think it really, just remember that, especially from your loved ones and your friends, people you know that care about you, that their ignorance, you know, isn't a standard of their love. And I think just remembering that through all interactions has really helped me have like positive relationships.
I think it's very interesting that, you know, religion definitely, whether or not you grew up in Utah or somewhere else, religion is all around, and there's pieces of that have affected all of our lives, both in positive and not so positive ways. And so I think it is, for many people, a way, it's often difficult to figure out how to navigate that and how to be, you know, okay with your loved ones who that is a tool. I think that was a great way to frame it, that is their best tool, you know, to be able to deal with their lives, but it's not the tool for everyone, and it hasn't been helpful for everybody. So I think this is a great discussion, and hopefully we can continue these kinds of discussions. That there's a question in the Q&A that I kind of want to bring up because we didn't really address it as we started, and part of it was because I wanted, you know, we didn't ask our panelists how they identify ahead of time. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. But the question in the panel is, can Two-Spirit be used to define both a sexual orientation and or a gender identity similar to the word queer? And I know everyone has their views on this, so I am glad to, let's open it up and let's talk about, what does Two-Spirit mean? Who can use it? How do we educate people about what Two-Spirit means?
Well, what I will often say is that we live in a world of labels, and it's such a sad thing that we have to live in a world of labels, right? Why couldn't we just treat everyone as human beings? And why is it so important about who we sleep with, right? So what I say is that gender is who you're born as, sexual orientation is who you sleep with. Now, when you talk, for me, when I talk about the Two-Spirit identity, in some of our tribes, that wasn't that wasn't like the concept, right? You know, when I go into tribal communities and I train or I, you know, talk about Two-Spirit identity, one of the things that I always ask the community is, do you know the word in your language that would identify someone like me? The sad part about it is that often a lot of tribal communities don't know. And so I will often come back and say, well, that's the impact of historical and intergenerational trauma. Because each tribe had a specific word that they used to identify someone like me. And so there's just this really huge impact. What I often will tell people too is that the term Two-Spirit was a concept that was created by Native individuals who identified as LGBTQ, right? So my deep understanding about that is that they wanted to sort of get away from that mainstream language, and it was about taking back that understanding of culture and spirituality, and that identity and the roles that we played in community, right? So I always tell people, if you know of non-Native people who are trying to call themselves Two-Spirit, please correct them, because that was a concept that was created by Native people who identify and should only be used by Native people who identify. And again, we know that the term Two-Spirit too is a word that's not often used in all tribal communities either, because it has its different understanding, right? And we need to be respectful of that. And so I say that all the time, but one of the things I go even into a deeper understanding is, like, I remind tribal communities that we're also failing our children. We're failing them because we're not teaching them about this identity. Not that we're trying to force children to call themselves Two-Spirit, but that cultural aspect of what it means to be Two-Spirit, or whatever word that's used in your language, because we did play roles in community. And so a lot of our young people are connecting to words that I don't connect to as an adult. You know, even using the word queer, that was a very derogatory term that was used against me growing up. And I'm not going to reveal my age, but in the fact that, you know, every time I hear the word queer, I cringe, because that was it was a bad word that was pounded into me, right? But I respect our young people today who want to call themselves queer, because for them that has meaning, right? So it's, you know, again, I mean, I just think about how sad it is that we live in a world of labels and we have to defend who we are, right? But one of the things that I've learned in doing this work, but also being connected to ceremony, being connected to culture and spirituality, is that I am who I am, and I'm Native first. I'm an Indian first. I'm Dakota first before anything else. And then my identities follow, right? So it's like just embracing who I am as an Indian person, as a Dakota person. So again, I mean, when we talk about gender and sexual orientation, I honestly believe that we all have our different understanding in it, and it's okay. There shouldn't be just one, we shouldn't just view it one way, right? We should be respectful how others view it. And again, I would never force someone to say you should identify as Two-Spirit. Identify who you are comfortable with, right? But again, we always have to, like, defend how we believe and how we think, which is, it's not okay, right? We shouldn't be having these arguments. We should respect people and always carry that cultural value and that understanding of showing compassion, you know, empathy, because one thing that I carry in my work is what a Dakota Two-Spirit elder said to me. She said, if you don't have compassion, you have nothing at all. And so that's what I carry in my everyday life, the work that I do, the work that I do within community, but just having so much respect for people, you know. Again, for me, I just stay away from the bad people. But yeah, Thank you. I got a private chat here from. But again, too, like just respecting those individuals, like the elders that were there when they coined that term Two-Spirit, like Clyde Hall, Marlon Fixio, oh, I'm trying to think of her name. She's a Lakota Two-Spirit elder, Beverly Lil Thunder, all of those individuals. And I always just remind people, go back and talk to those individuals, learn from them. Because again, you know, there's a reason why they did these things, and it was to help our community. And for us as young people, yeah, I'm not that young, but as young people, you know, just carrying those thoughts, that medicine, because we need to pass it on to the next generation. So that's my thoughts.
I think it's really important too, Lenny. We were talking about compassion, and I think that doesn't just come from, you know, us talking to the non-Native communities. I think that goes for us talking to other community members within the Native community as well. You know, I've had conversations with colleagues of mine where they've been, you know, they've been labeled as Two-Spirit and they don't identify as Two-Spirit, and that label has been pushed on them. So I think it's really important for us, you know, as individuals to continue just to stay open-minded and to lead with an open heart, so that we have a better understanding of who we are as individuals, but we also have a better understanding of how our community operates. And I really think, you know, for me, like the term Two-Spirit, it definitely is something that I identify with now. And I think that's something that's so great about identity, is that's consistently changing, right? We're always changing how we identify. We're always looking at different ways to describe ourselves. And for me, you know, going back to what you were talking about, reclaiming that word, that term Winkta, right? Two-Spirit for me is a stepping stone for me to take a look back at my tribe and to, you know, talk to my elders and figure out what those terms were for me, so that I can be on my own journey of reclamation, because I think that's really, really important.
Well, I'm glad that one of our elders is actually throwing in some chat, Marlon Fixio. Again, you know, what he's saying is that the term Two-Spirit was never forced upon anyone, right? I mean, if you think about it, there's what, today we have what, 570 some tribes with over 200 languages. It was just one word that came about, and it's a universal term, and just that deep understanding. But again, you know, it's just, for me, it's just that struggle of having to identify, right? And so I'm always saying, you know, it's hard for us who identify, because we're trying to claim, we're trying to fight who we are, we're trying to get people to understand who we are, versus a straight person that doesn't have to fight for who they are, right? They don't get the questions like we do about, you know, what makes you straight? Why are you straight? You know, but us who identify, we're always having to defend who we are. And I don't know if I'll ever see that in my lifetime, if that will ever change, but I hope for our future generations that they don't have to go through what we go through, right? So that's just like a deep understanding and that I'm thinking about. So
I think that, you know, this discussion really kind of highlights one of the issues in Indian country that is a kind of universal, is that, you know, it is important to know our history and know where we come from, and to have that connection with our elders who can share that information, and so that we can perpetuate that. I think that one of the, you know, in my reading and researching about that term Two-Spirit, you know, one of the things why I think it resonates with a lot of people, is that it is more inclusive of a holistic identity. It isn't just, focusing on, how do I present myself in the world? How, what do I like to wear? What are the things I like to do? Who am I attracted to? Who do I love? But it also it includes, cultural and spiritual and traditional aspects as well, that I think all of you in the panel have talked about. These are things that are important to me. These are things that I carry forward and I want to share. And so I think it does highlight that knowing our history and knowing our elders and knowing where we come from, our culture and our tradition, our spirituality as Indigenous people, is how we move forward into the world and learn how we be. And so I think that this is a good conversation that I think probably needs to happen more, that we have these conversations, we look to our history, we look to our future. Our people are still here because we've held on to these things, and it may not look exactly the way it did, hundreds and thousands of years ago, but we're holding on to it because it's important to us. So I thank you for having these conversations and bringing up these points and asking questions, because I think this is how we move forward as Indigenous people, as community, and as relatives, right? I just wanted to kind of mention, two of our panel members are going to have to hop off real quick. So I just wanted to thank Mariana and Antonieta for being a part of this, and hopefully you'll be a part of future conversations as well. And then I think moving into the next question, I think this really brings into the next point that we wanted to ask is that what words of advice do you have for allies or advocates or helpers on how to help stand up for Native LGBTQIA+ and Two-Spirit relatives? I think this conversation about people asking for help and feeling safe to ask for help, and also being able to understand that there's a lot of education that needs to be done. So for peoples that are asking for help, how to help support our relatives, how do you listen to how we need help, right? Instead of just assuming that other people have the answers to help our community.
I can kind of put my input. I just think that those that really want to help us, they should be at a point to be respectful for whoever is needing the help, and whatever may come up from that person, take it in, if you can be as respectful as possible, be open to any suggestions or anything that they have on their mind, and just listen. All you have to do is listen, really, because for so many years I was pushed to the very far of the line, the back of the line, just because they didn't want to listen to, what I think should be equal, or how I want to be, I don't know, portrayed as a person. I would say I want to be just as equal as any other person, a straight person or a male. I know that there's a lot of controversy with women and men. That's something that I go through all the time. As a two-spirited, I see myself as more kind of butch. I'm a hothead. If someone is going to square up to me, I'm going to go at them. But yeah, I just want to be just the same place as a male. I can do everything that a male can do. And I am constantly trying to, show other people that, I can drive a truck. I can lift up wood or cut wood like you can, or I can use a saw and cut off a tree just like a male can. I'm going to be putting on my gloves, my boots, and my pants and getting up the tree to cut it just to prove a point. But, I think that's something really important, is just to listen, really, and be open with that person. That's just my opinion, but yeah.
I think something else that's really important is just to remind ourselves to stay curious. I think it's, I think it's really important for us to be able to ask questions. And there are a lot of resources out there. I know Lenny has some great resources on their website. We have some really great resources here at the Urban Indian Center, and there are other urban Indian organizations out there. And they all have resources. But I also think that these types of panels, anytime you have an opportunity to be able to jump on a discussion or a webinar or an opportunity of education presents itself, I think take it and continue to ask questions. I think something we're all getting used to or are used to at this point is we've heard a lot of questions that maybe didn't sit well with us in the beginning, but we've learned how to swallow those hard to swallow questions and be able to answer them in a more appropriate way with time. So I think go ahead and ask questions and stay curious.
I have a follow-up that we gave our panelists some questions ahead of time, but I have a follow-up that is not on here, just kind of based on that. I'm wondering if, as you kind of think back on all your individual journeys, was there somebody who stuck out to you, somebody who helped you or was there for you that you maybe want to share? What was so impactful about that person or those people?
Well, I guess through my own experience, and I was going to say, Rose, I love that you said that, because that's the beauty of who we are, that we're able to navigate back and forth, which is a good thing, right? And I like that you said, I could be Butch, right? Well, I could be both too. And that's where I embrace that. I love that that's who I am, right? So thank you for saying that. For me, not growing up in a community or a family that was accepting of who I was, and then having to go on my own healing journey to get where I'm at. One of the things that I always, one specific person who I talk about her and I honor her because she is a Dakota, she is a Two-Spirit person who taught me about ceremony. Took me into my first sweat lodge, taught me how to carry the rocks, the importance of taking care of the inipi, tending to the fire, taught me how to pray, taught me how to really think about my cultural values, what are important to me, teaching me about compassion. So I look at her as being the first person who taught me those things, which should have been my own family or my own relatives that should have taught me those things. But it was a Dakota Two-Spirit woman who taught me those things. So I think of her all the time when I'm out there doing work in tribal communities, and she has been a great impact on me. So I always like to share that and share stories of elders who I've sat and talked with, who have said things to me that are of great importance, right? So when I talk about respecting people or even listening to people, I always say I take what I need and I leave the rest, because I'm taking what I believe is important for me and in helping me in the work that I do. There's so many other people that I could say that I admire, who have taught me things, who have done things for me. But again, for me, it's just really listening to those elders, because they do have good medicine. And I'm always encouraging people, go and talk to our Two-Spirit elders, because they have a lot of knowledge. And if it wasn't for some of the people that I have grown to just love and adore, like Marlon Fixio, I have spent a lot of time with him, just, visiting with him and him teaching me things. And a couple of years ago, I had the overall experience of meeting Clyde Hall for the first time. And I was so giddy just sitting with him, right? Because him talking about just so many important things, when you know, as part of my work, I've always used a quote that Beverly Little Thunder always said, you know, in regards to the pain of being rejected by one's own people can be the most devastating. That was part of the work that I did, and not realizing that it was Beverly Little Thunder who said that quote, right? So I met her at the first the second Wink Day gathering in South Dakota, and I was just giddy just sitting with her, you know. So I mean, these people, like I said, our elders, they carry good medicine. They carry teachings, and we're going to have to pass that on to our generation and on, right? You know, as allies, you know, one of the things too is, you know, be respectful. That's the most important thing, is to be respectful to people and how they identify. You don't have to question their identity and why they identify that way. You know, like I said, for me, it's just sad that we live in a world of labels, that we always have to fight for who we are and to say who we are. And I agree. I mean, it's okay to be curious. It's okay to ask questions, but sometimes it gets really overwhelming, right? I mean, if you think about what me and Cody said earlier, it's like it depends on what space we're in how we identify. We could be in a non-native space, and because we don't want to get filled with a lot of questions about Two-Spirit identity, we just, for me, I just call myself a gay person, right? You know, and the thing that I always talk about too is my partner. You know, I've been with my partner for almost 11 years now. He didn't come out until he was 48 years old. And he has children. He thought that if he got married and had children, those feelings of who he is would go away, but they didn't, right? And so I connected him with this support group that was supposed to be specifically for males who were married, who have children. And so we went to this event, and there was non-native people there who were calling themselves Two-Spirit, and they were drinking alcohol. And my partner knows how much I really, really advocate strongly for the community. And he looks at me, and I just shake my head no at him, because I wasn't about ready to argue with people who are using alcohol about Two-Spirit identity, you know. But again, I'm always, you know, I've been in a lot of places, even presenting in universities about Two-Spirit identity, and having non-native lesbian women say, well, why can't I call myself Two-Spirit? When I've just like presented about it and talked about it, and finally I just, you know, in a respectful way have said to them, do you know like what happened to Indian people? Do you realize the impact of historical and intergenerational trauma on Indian people? And a lot of times they say yes. And I'm like, so you know that Indian people had a lot of things taken away from them? Yes. And I said, you can't have this. This is a concept you can't have, because it was created by people who I call my elders, right? So anyway, again, I'm going on a tangent, sorry.
Does anybody else have, let's see, circling back to the original question, does anybody have any other experience of being supported or having someone that was there for them that made a real impact in their life?
So I had a cousin. It was like back in high school, my senior year, and that's when I came out. So me and my cousin were hauling water, and I've never said anything to anybody about me being two-spirited, and but that's not the way I called it then, because I didn't know what to call it, and I didn't know too much about it because I was barely trying to figure out what I am, I guess. And so while we were hauling water, my cousin came out to me, and then I'm like, that's so great, because I identified myself as bisexual. So I was like, yeah, I'm bi as well. And he's like, don't lie. And I'm like, just because I said it doesn't mean you have to. And I'm like, no. I think it's true. It's so great that you said this, and I would never had the confidence to say it to anybody. And I'm so glad that he was there to come out to me and trust me. And I thought it was a great experience. And that day forward, I became very confident of who I want to be in, or like who I am, I guess, in the LGBT community. And yeah, I thought that was a great experience for myself. So.
And then I just wanted to add my answer for that question. I just think that those who were really understanding of my coming out story, or the answer I didn't think that was going to happen, you know, family members who were just open and supportive. I think that was just like a really touching thing, just because I thought the worst. I thought they were gonna, you know, kick me out of the house, or disown me, you know, leave me out of all the family activities. So I really think that just with everyone who was so understanding, especially here at work, that's a big thing. I thought that it was going to be difficult to say that, you know, my girlfriend works with me, and how are we going to tell all the employees that, you know, we ride to work every day, or we go home the same time. So at first, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks, we just kept it a secret, and finally we told everyone, and it was just randomly okay. I didn't think it was going to be that okay, but yeah, I think just, you know, experiences with that, with every individual who were just open and accepting, was a really good response.
For me, my first experience of feeling that support was always with my mom. I feel like my mom, you know, like I had mentioned earlier before, I had been disencultured growing up. And so my mom really was a catalyst for me to always chase what felt right and to continue to be brave. And I think especially during those times where I was in my 20s and I was really trying to find some sort of connection to who I am or who I needed to become, I really leaned into that unknown. And I always like kind of heard her voice, you know, like guiding me through these things and reminding me that it's okay. Like I'm going to hit roadblocks, but it's still going to be okay. And in doing that, I think that the other part of that support that I ended up finding were through Native community members that have become really good friends to me, and that I also look up to. Like Lenny are definitely somebody that I've met in my life that I think you inspire me every single time we're able to have a conversation on all of these different webinars we're on. Like it's always so great to share this space with you. My friend Dr. James McCook-AhTave was a huge catalyst in helping me find my identity and how I identify today. Clyde Hall is another person that I look up to. And I, you know, and all of these encounters have brought me to the Urban Indian Center here, where, you know, Rose and Kylie, you guys really did create a space that inspired me to even apply here. So I really thank all of you for helping support me on my journey. So thank you.
In working, for people that don't know, working at the Urban Indian Center, when you come here and we find out what your talents are, we take advantage of that as quickly as we can. And so Rose and Kylie graciously stepped in our first Two-Spirit powwow to be the head dancers. And I think that event really helped us to really grow and move forward in thinking about how do we create a space that is welcoming and open, not just accepting, but that we are welcoming and opening and building a home, you know, for all the members of our community. So, and the same with Cody. When Cody came here, you know, we didn't really have a lot of Two-Spirit or LGBTQ focused programming, but we've really been able to kind of expand what we're doing. And I'm very grateful for everybody's, you know, willingness to step into those roles. And I think for that, you know, in Native culture, you know, we've heard a little bit from our panelists talking about that our Two-Spirit relatives had very special roles in our communities, that were honored people in our communities. And I think that is one thing that I'm grateful for in working in this kind of agency, that people are able to find, you know, what they're good at, what their roles are, and be able to step into those things and be supported and grow. And then also, just to share a little bit about our agency too, it kind of made me laugh when Rose was talking about, like, I'll step up to you, because I see her and Kylie out every day at lunch, taking on our physical trainer, trying to beat him at basketball every day. So yes. Okay. So kind of maybe wrapping up our next two questions, which one of them there might not be a lot of answers to, so I'm going to kind of put them together. But, you know, I think it's really great that we've been able to highlight, you know, how are we able to find knowledge keepers and helpers and supporters. But in the world that we live in today, it is often, sometimes we do find people that are not supportive, including our family and our community members. And so one of the things that I'm wondering is, how do you navigate those relationships with people that may not know how to help support you? And also, how do you take care of yourself? Because it is hard. And we've heard from our panel that sometimes you have to make that decision that I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to start this argument, to take care of ourselves. So kind of two different questions. I'll leave it to the panel to decide which ones you want to answer.
You all are too funny. So one of the things that I think about in taking care of myself is like learning and knowing when to rest. Because basically in the work that I do, I'm a mental and chemical health provider. I have my own private practice. I'm also involved. I facilitate several groups online. I'm involved with a lot of my Tate Topa work, where I'm doing a lot of presentations with different organizations. So one of the things that I've learned in taking care of myself is learning to say no. Because if I don't say no, then I'm going to burn myself out. And that's happened before, to the point where I got to the point where I didn't enjoy the work that I'm doing. And it is important for me to say no and not feel guilty about it, because sometimes I feel guilty because I'm so passionate about my work. And I've learned now to reach out to other Two-Spirit people, or Native LGBTQ people who are mental health providers, and reach out to them and say, hey, are you willing to, would you be interested in talking with a potential relative that, wants some help? And I need to do those things because, during COVID, it has been it's been easy to do everything online with, going through COVID. But now that everything is opening up, I don't have the capacity to be taking on new people, because that I'm not able to do the other work that I need to do. And one of the things for me as a mental health provider, and having my own private practice, of course, there's rules that I have to follow right within my state. But one of the things that I don't do is I don't make it difficult for the relatives that I work with to feel like they are having to pay the price of what a non-Native mental health provider will pay, right? I go at a very low scale. That's my choice, and I choose to do that because one of the things that I say is that I'm not here to get rich off my people's pain. I'm here to help them heal. But it's a system that we have grown to be a part of, that we have to do these things. But again, I love the fact that I'm in private practice because I get to choose how I do things. And it's not having to follow a system that requires you to do all these things. Because I even have, like, even my own Native colleagues, they get upset with me because I choose not to do things the way that they do things, and that's okay. And I just tell them, respect what I want to do because this is how I view my work, you know. It's important, you know, to go for a walk. It's important to take a nice hot bath. That self-care is really, really important because if you don't do those things, you're not going to do the proper services for our people, right? The other thing too, you know, I want to go back to what you said earlier because I didn't want to forget saying that, but as allies, one of the most important things that we need to do, our allies need to do, is to really understand the issues that impacts this community. To also understand too that we have so many issues that have impacted us that even our own community doesn't talk about it because we don't have a safe space to talk about it. One of the things that I know of is that we know that there's missing and murdered Two-Spirit people out there, but yet we're not talking about it within our own community because we don't have a safe space to talk about it. And we have other people who don't identify, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but they're more or less saying, well, this is what this community needs, but not going to the source, which is the community, right? And so, you know, that's why I advocate so strongly across the country in regards to our community, because I want to see us have a space that's safe, that we're able to have these conversations, and also the fact that we all need to collaborate with one another to help one another. We shouldn't make this work competitive because there's so much work out there that needs to be done. So anyway, you know, I just really want to thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this panel, even though sometimes I can be very boisterous, but that's just who I am. And again, I just want to say thank you.
We can move on to the next question, but I do hope that you all are taking care of yourself, because regardless, I think, of whether or not you feel, the panelists feel like they're working, it is work to be in the world today. As an Indigenous person, as a Two-Spirit person, sometimes that work is really hard. And so I think it is important to take care of ourselves and make sure that, you know, we are not trying to pour from an empty cup. So I think our last question, I'm just going to kind of modify it a little bit, but I really am curious about, you know, as you think about your journeys that you're on and the world that we live in, what would our world look like that is in a world that's inclusive and based on acceptance, not just acceptance, but equity? And I keep going back to this idea of, you know, finding our roles and being able to do that work that is meaningful and important, or live in a world that is meaningful and important. So for our panelists, what would the world look like for you and for our family and our relatives in a world that has equity?
So what I imagine my world would look like if everything was totally equal is people would love more than having hate around. I mean, that's an obvious one. We would be so equal to each other that we would respect, care, love the other person that is next to us. Or I even think that we would have so many less wars with ourselves, with other people, with community, with religion. It wouldn't be so difficult to be the person that you are. So that's what I think it would be.
For me, the world one is a little too big for me to discuss. But for the community part, for our Native community, I think for me, equity would look like, especially when we're talking about Native LGBTQ and Two-Spirit relatives, I think having us being able to return to sacred spaces would be a big thing for me. Returning to ceremonies and Sundance and blessings, and us being able to hold those spaces and being able to facilitate those things like we were in the past. That's a big thing for me. And I think just being back to the table, kind of like, what Lenny was talking about with the pronouns, just being invited to the table, just holding that space, just being a part of the conversations that are happening. I think it can be really difficult trying to navigate these different paths, regardless if it's with our education and not being educated enough, or, not coming from a specific family, or not being straight enough or cisgendered enough. I think that all of these things can get really overwhelming for us. And I think that just because we're not jumping through specific hoops, that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have something to bring to that table to discuss. So that's what that would look like for me.
I also think, going off of what Rose and Cody said, just like culturally, I think different religions would be more accepting, more open mind to being yourself, and they would probably be spiritually of I don't know, going off of that culture, also making it its own culture, I would say. I think it would just make things much easier in the world for people like us, I would say.
Well, for me, it would be that deep understanding that, as Native community, as all of a Native community, is that the realization that the Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people are standing outside of the circle. And so when we think about before colonization, we were a part of that circle. And now we're standing outside of the circle trying to fight our way back and trying to even get our own Indian people to understand the importance of who we are. And that just that deep understanding of how much historical trauma has changed even our own people's view of this population. I see, a world where our children who identify, our youth, our adults, that no violence is impacted on us, and that we're able to come to the table and talk about our own experiences of trauma, sexual assault, missing and murdered, and being a part of the conversation. And again, we as a community leading the work, not having someone who doesn't identify say, well, this is what you need, and not really coming to us and talking with us. That's the world that I want to see. But I hope that, one of the things that I know of is that when I started this work 8 to 10 years ago, it is so much different now. Things are changing, which is a good thing. And the way that I look at it is that when I started this work a long time ago, I always went into a space and always stood up and said, why are you not talking about Two-Spirit people? Because what you're talking about, especially going to these sexual assault, human trafficking conferences, and I would get up and say, why are you not talking about Two-Spirit people? Because what you're talking about is exactly what's happening to my community. And it took about 4 times when someone finally said to me, an organization says, Lenny, how can you help us? What can you teach us? And that's where my work started. Even just going into a space talking about domestic violence within our own community, where the advocates that have been around for many, many years, 30 to 35 years, finally getting them to understand that domestic violence happens within our community, right? So I had to really come into a space and be respectful to women who have been doing this work for so long and get them to respect me. Does that make sense? But in a way, I'm not saying that as a bad thing, but getting them to really think and understand what is happening within our community. Because once we start to understand all of these things, then we're able to have conversation within our own community. But a lot of us still don't feel safe. We're still experiencing trauma. We don't have a space to talk about our trauma. We don't have a space to heal. And that's what we should be working towards, so that we can get more of our community members to come forward. And even with our trans people, you know, we can't forget about our trans people. And even, you know, we have to create space for them, you know. So anyway, that's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
I want to thank you all so much for being a part of this, for sharing your words, for helping to teach us. And I think that I am hopeful that this is the first of many, many conversations that we have moving forward, to be able to talk about, you know, how do we have a community that does represent a lot of these things that you're talking about. So thank you so much for participating and sharing with us, and thank you all for attending. And check out our webpage, uicsl.org, or our social media if you want more information about what we do. Or you can definitely reach out to us, to the inviter, if you have more questions or want resources, or some information about what Lenny is doing. Thank you.